Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the June 3rd, 2015 meeting of the Murfreesboro Planning Commission. We have a quorum present tonight, so I'll call the meeting to order. First item on today's business is old business. Autumn Woods Apartments Phase 2 site plan for 144-unit multifamily residential development on 6.86 acres, zone RM16, located at Old Fort Parkway. Mr. John Elliott is the developer. Mr. Plumley, I presume.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Lamb. Good evening, Chairman Lamb and members of the Planning Commission. This item of old business was considered on the May 20th Planning Commission meeting under Plats and Plans, site plan request for a 144-unit phase of multifamily development, the first phase of which was approved in March. There were some current concerns about the access drive onto Old Fort Parkway, access rights to that, as well as the ownership of that property. And for that reason, the Planning Commission deferred action on this item at the May 20th meeting. Since that time, staff has reviewed the plans that were submitted, as the legal department has endeavored to research the ownership of that appendage that goes out to Old Fort Parkway, which is going to provide access to Phase 2 to Old Fort Parkway. And in addition, we have also met with both the developers and representative of the owner of the H&K property to the west. The end result is that the revised plan that you have before you does take into consideration the access to the southern portion of the H&K property to the west. As you can see on the site plans, we've laid those out at your desks, the latest and greatest versions of them. There is a driveway that is from the main access road coming from Old Fort Parkway into the H&K property south of the second building. This provides for the access to the balance of the H&K property. Of course, if the H&K property is ever subdivided, it will need to meet the requirements of the subdivision regulations and the zoning ordinance with regards to lot frontage. So as we've discussed with both the applicants and the owners of the property next door, even though this will provide access for the balance of the property, it will not satisfy the minimum road frontage requirements, and they understand that. The minimum road frontage requirements being if they intend to subdivide that property in the future. In addition, one of the major outstanding issues that had not been addressed prior to the May 20th meeting was the required buffering and landscaping along that appendage that leads out to Old Fort Parkway. We have also been in discussions with the applicant about that required landscaping. We as staff feel that this is a good opportunity for a variance to the landscaping requirements along that appendage. There's only so much width to work with on that appendage, and with that being the case, and with the access to Old Fort Parkway being critical to both from a traffic standpoint as well as to the functionality of the site for the development of the site, it's important that that access remain. And if that access is to remain, it is very difficult to achieve the required plantings, if not impossible, along that appendage. So the applicants have already met with Mr. Lewis of our planning staff and intend to make application to the Board of Zoning Appeals this month for the needed landscape variances. There are some additional staff comments as we met with the applicants and with the representative of the property to the west, and I would like to go over those comments verbally. And what I will say is that any approval of this plan should be subject to all staff comments, both written and verbal. The first staff comment is to remove the portion of the driveway on the H&K property. On the latest and greatest plan, the applicants are proposing to reconstruct the driveway entirely, a portion of which, or the existing driveway that serves the Town and Country Apartments. So they plan on tearing that driveway up and reconstructing the driveway to meet current requirements, current standards. That would leave about a 4 to 5 foot strip of asphalt on the H&K property to the west. Both property owners have agreed that it makes no sense to saw cut right on the property line and leave 4 or 5 feet of unusable pavement. And so it was agreed upon that the developers of this apartment complex would remove that 4 to 5 feet of asphalt and totally reconstruct that driveway. And the access to the existing apartment complex would remain. Also, in lieu of the required buffer plantings north of the northernmost existing building on the Town and Country site, at staff's urging, the applicants and the owners of the H&K property next door have agreed to a shared landscape yard, or have verbally agreed to a shared landscape yard, and we would like to make that a condition of approval that a 10-foot wide shared planting yard on the H&K property to the west from the northernmost building to Old Fort Parkway be planted and maintained in accordance with the Section 27 of the zoning ordinance. Number 3, the proposed access easement that will serve both the Town and Country apartments, the lot that has the chiropractor's office, as well as the proposed apartment complex, should include the proposed access drive south of the 2 existing apartment buildings, so that whatever development occurs south of the existing apartment buildings at Town and Country, they will have the legal rights to use that proposed driveway south of that second building. Finally, approval is subject to the BZA granting the landscape variances that have been identified. Overall, there are 4 landscape variances. They are primarily along or near that appendage that sticks out towards Old Fort Parkway. And Mr. Ives can elaborate this based with regards to the question of ownership of that appendage. It's Mr. Ives' belief that appendage that sticks out towards Old Fort Parkway is, in fact, owned by the developers of the new apartment complex.
Yes, we've been both combination of from my prior work on looking at this and some deeds that were provided to us by Mr. Bill Huddleston. This 50-foot strip has been deeded to these applicants, and so we're satisfied that they in fact own it, have the right to build on it and all that. Do believe it's subject to an access easement for the H&K property, which they're working with them and maintaining that, retaining that. So from an ownership standpoint, I think any question that anybody has been answered.
Okay.
So I suppose the bottom line, Chairman Lamb and members of the Planning Commission, is that based on the meetings that we have had with the applicants and the representatives of the property next door, we believe that all of our questions have been answered, and it would be our recommendation that any approval by the Planning Commission be subject to both the verbal and written staff comments, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions from members of the Planning Commission?
I have a comment. I spoke with the partner, Mr. Wilson, in H&K today, and he confirmed that they had worked this out, and he wanted me to share that at the Planning Commission meeting tonight because he was not going to be able to be here.
Thank you, Ken. Anything else? If there's no other comments, we're ready for a motion.
Move for approval, subject to all staff comments.
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Move on to the public hearings. We have 4 public hearings scheduled this evening. The first of which is a rezoning application for approximately 0.46 acres located along the east side of South Highland Avenue to be rezoned from residential duplex to RS4. Rutherford County Habitat for Humanity is the applicant. Mr. Plummer.
Thank you, Chairman Lamb. The subject property is located at the northeast corner of the intersection of Reed Avenue and South Highland Avenue. It consists of 2 parcels that are currently owned by Rutherford County Habitat for Humanity. They're zoned RD, residential duplex. The northernmost parcel of the 2 had a duplex on it, and the southernmost parcel had a single-family home. Both of those structures have been demolished. It's Habitat's desire to re-subdivide the property in order to create 3 lots on the property and to build 3 single-family homes. The subject property could be re-subdivided for 2 separate RD lots for a maximum of 4 dwelling units. So the anticipated 3 single-family homes is actually less than what could be achieved with the current RD zoning. The surrounding zoning includes RD zoning to the north and to the east, and the land uses in the RD zone consist of both single-family uses and 2-family uses. To the west, across South Highland Avenue, is RS4 zoning, which is the same zoning classification that the applicant has requested. So the subject property is actually contiguous with RD zoning across the street, or excuse me, RS4 zoning across the street. And the applicant has provided a sample subdivision plat of how he intends to divide the property, and I have pulled that up as well. You can see the 3 proposed lots. This may or may not be the ultimate configuration, but it's similar to what they're looking to achieve. I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing. We'll need to conduct a public hearing and then formulate a recommendation to City Council. Mr. Roy Saylor with Rutherford County Habitat for Humanity, the applicant, is in attendance as well. Do you have any questions for him?
Okay. Any questions before I open the public hearing? Before I open the public hearing, if you're here and have not been to one of our public hearings before, I'll briefly describe how we conduct our public hearings. We'll open the public hearing. If you would like to come forward to speak either for or against the proposal, please come to the microphone. First of all, state your name and give your address if you would. Make all your comments to the Planning Commission. We'll try to answer any questions that you have at the conclusion of the public hearing. And please limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes. All that being said, I'll open the public hearing at this time. Ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak. Nobody? Okay. I'll close the public hearing. Any questions or comments from the Planning Commission?
Mr. Chairman, I move for approval, subject to all staff comments.
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed. The motion carries. The next public hearing is the rezoning application for approximately 6.17 acres located at the southwest corner of Medical Center Parkway and Robert Rose Drive to be rezoned from MU to Commercial Highway. Mr. Tommy Smith is the applicant. Mr. Blumel.
Thank you, Chairman Lamb. Subject property, as you mentioned, is a little over 6 acres at the southwest corner of Medical Center Parkway and Robert Rose Drive. Property is zoned MU and was actually zoned MU, or mixed use, back in 2013 at the request of the applicant. The property had been zoned Commercial Highway prior to being rezoned to MU back in 2013 when the MU zone was adopted in our zoning ordinance. Since that time, the applicant has refined his proposed development plan for the property, and we actually saw a preliminary plat on this property at the May 20th Planning Commission meeting. The preliminary plat didn't exactly reflect how they intend to divide the property because they submitted the preliminary plat based on the current zoning. And with the current MU zoning, there are some limitations, and they can't divide it exactly the way they want to. And that's the reason why they've made application to rezone it back to Commercial Highway from mixed use. The main sticking points are that in the MU zone, there is a minimum 200 feet lot frontage when it fronts on an arterial or a collector street. The manner in which the applicant wishes to subdivide will have a lot that fronts on Medical Center Parkway that will not have the required 200 feet road frontage. The CH zoning classification does not have that 200-foot road frontage requirement. In addition, the applicant wishes to have a flag lot that would have an appendage leading to Robert Rose Drive, and the zoning ordinance is silent on flag lots in the MU zone. So while one may argue that flag lots are or are not permitted in the MU zone, we know for certain that they are permitted in the CH zone, and because of the other minimum lot width requirement, this is yet another reason why the CH zoning would work for the applicant's development plan. The applicant anticipates uses that are more consistent with the CH zoning, at any rate, on this property, as opposed to the mixed-use zoning district. I would anticipate that it will develop along the same lines as we have seen up and down Medical Center Parkway in this area. And a great deal of the property along Medical Center Parkway is zoned commercial highway already, including property further to the west, including the Peter D's restaurant and the Avenue Shopping Center. The property directly to the south is zoned MU, as is the property directly to the west, and the property on the other three remaining corners of Medical Center Parkway and Robert Rose Drive. However, the applicant has requested rezoning back to commercial highway. The Planning Commission should know that the property is in the GDO number 1, the Gateway Design Overlay District number 1, and regardless of if it's in the mixed use or commercial highway zones, will still be subject to the development standards in the Gateway Design Overlay District number 1. The Planning Commission will need to conduct a public hearing and then formulate a recommendation to the City Council. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Matt Taylor is here representing Mr. Tommy Smith, who is the applicant for the project.
Okay. Mr. Taylor, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Not specifically. Mr. Blomley went over everything I would have said, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have of me.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Taylor? Thank you, sir. In that case, I'll open the public hearing, ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak. Seeing no one come forward, I'll close the public hearing. If there's no further comments or questions, we're ready for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval subject to all staff comments.
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed. Motion carries. Next public hearing is Asbury Road at Florence Road, right-of-way abandonment request for 2.4 acres of Asbury Road right-of-way and 0.21 acres of Florence Road right-of-way. Mr. Kevin Waldron is the applicant. Mr. Plummer.
Thank you, Chairman Lamb. This is a right-of-way abandonment request. As you mentioned, it includes 0.21 acres of Florence Road that was left over after the reconstruction of Florence Road. And you can see that if we can pull up the map on the screen, there are two small slivers of orange, one right here and one right here, that are excess right-of-way of Florence Road. And there is the larger portion that you see adjacent to I-24 that is excess right-of-way of Asbury Road. The Planning Commission will recall a number of years ago, I would say probably around 2005, 2006, as a part of the Thistle Downs PUD zoning plan, the Asbury Road alignment was shifted further to the north to create more separation from the I-24, 840 interchange. And you can see that approximately 500 to 600 feet further to the north of its previous alignment. Since that time, the former right-of-way of Asbury Road has been barricaded. Mr. Waldron has moved forward with with construction on Thistle Downs sections 3 and 4, and the section of Asbury Road, the relocated section of Asbury Road, has been opened to traffic and is now serving as the actual functional equivalent of Asbury Road. What you see in orange is no longer open to traffic. So Mr. Waldron has made a request to abandon the excess right-of-way of both Florence Road and Asbury Road, and this is a mandatory referral that the Planning Commission has to consider and then forward a recommendation on to the City Council. And the City Council has the ultimate say over a mandatory referral. I will mention that there are 4 conditions of approval that are recommended in the staff comments. The Planning Commission at this time should disregard those 4 conditions of approval. We are still working out what will need to be done to transfer that property in the future, and what all easements would need to be retained, and what all constructed elements will need to be modified or removed. But that's something that ultimately would need to be worked out prior to City Council, with City Council's approval, and the Planning Commission should consider the right-of-way abandonment without regard to the proposed conditions. We do need to conduct a public hearing on this matter and then formulate a recommendation to the City Council. And Mr. Sam Huddleston is here also. He has extensive knowledge of the situation with this abandonment as well. Be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Huddleston, do you have anything to say, or do you? Okay. Okay. Any questions for staff? Okay, I'll open the public hearing, ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak.
Good evening. My name is Joseph Smith. I live at 5295 Asbury Road off the dead-end section there of Florence. Lived there for approximately 24 years. And this has been our main ingress and egress from our residence the entire time.
Mr. Smith,
Yes, sir.
I'm just notifying you that I'm handing out what you asked
Yes,
me
sir,
to hand
please. I've got a handout there with just some emails back and forth from the mayor's office and also the city manager's office, where they have both agreed to come out and actually look at the intersection. I had some pictures to show you, but the fancy computer y'all have wouldn't open them, so I won't be able to show you the actual intersection. But our main concern with this is since the original plan, a store has opened directly across from that lines up with the new Asbury Road that has been relocated, which actually has created a extremely dangerous intersection. If you know where Mr. Howard Smith's place used to be, there's a very sharp curve there. People are coming around that curve at 55, 60 miles per hour, already driving in the turn lane. They cut the curve short. So if you're sitting in the turn lane there in front of that store waiting to make a left turn onto the new Asbury Road, I mean, you're a sitting duck. Originally, when this, and some of y'all may know, I'm a state trooper. I have been for 25 years stationed here in Rutherford County, so I know a little bit about traffic. And I gave you some handouts there from the city police department. Since the road was annexed, there's only been 2 traffic crashes in that entire area. One was an off-road ATV crash. The other one, and I have a copy of that crash, had nothing to do with the intersection. It was all car on the wrong side of the road crossing over the interstate, so it had nothing to do with the intersection. So the original intersection is a safe intersection, or at least there would be some traffic crashes there. Like I say, I've been here for 24 years. I've never worked direct there and don't know of anybody else that has. But I can promise you at the new intersection that they've created now, there will be some very dangerous crashes there. There's a business at the dead end of the road, Mr. Paul Grattan, who couldn't be here tonight. He's in England. He owns a helicopter repair company there. He brings in helicopters on tractor trailers that are now going to be going through this subdivision to get to our property and to his property. And also the large farm at the dead end there is always coming through with tractor trailers, large farm equipment, even some hazardous materials with poisons and stuff like that. That will also be that will be forced to go through this new subdivision now instead of having a dedicated route like we've always had. I just really can't find any valid reason, and nobody can give me a valid reason why this intersection needs to be closed other than to give this property to the developer. I can't understand. Mr. Walden showed me a document where the Florence Road property was promised to him, but it does not promise him the Asbury Road property at all. So, you know, if you look at what the county's paying for the property at Florence and Singer Road, it's $65,000 an acre. So you're giving him 2.4 acres or 4.2 acres. You know, that's a $265,000 piece of property that we're just giving away. I don't understand it, and I would ask it to either be deferred or not voted on, especially with the stipulations that he told you that you couldn't consider. If you would just come out and take a look at the intersection, I feel like by closing this and forcing us to, we own 55 acres there to dead end, and that will eventually, I'm sure, come into the city and be developed in some form or fashion. It's got a huge lake on it that could be used for campgrounds, stuff like that. And by forcing us to have the only access through a residential subdivision, I think that decreases our property values. Not to mention there's another 200-acre tract there at the dead end that most likely will eventually develop. Okay. So, you know, these people that are going to be in this subdivision, they're going to raise all kinds of cane when all this other traffic starts coming through, when that's the only entrance and exit. That's about all I have, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Smith.
My name is Rick Powell, live at 5299 Asbury. I'm one of the owners at the end of Asbury Road. I can't add anything else what Mr. Smith has given to you, but we also request that the access be reopened and back to where it was originally.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Powell.
My name's Rick Smith. I, too, live at 5295 Asbury Road. My concern is, of course, what we might do in the future with our 55 acres and how it might be affected by the changing of this roadway. I just ask that the commission would take another look at it and just, do the right thing. Whatever that is, I'll live with it. On Mr. Gratton's behalf, he does have a lot of truck traffic in and out of there, occasionally a tractor trailer. And I know he would like to be here tonight to speak his voice. I don't think that's going to work out too well going through the subdivision, even though it's a short distance. He also does have multiple deliveries. We've tolerated that. He's got a commercial business down there. He has an easement across our property, so he uses our driveway. But we've got along for a long time now, but you've already got a commercial business down there, and it's kind of like that wasn't taken into consideration. And nothing against Mr. Waldron. I mean, I'm sure, he's a good man. The other thing is the site radius or the site distance. If everybody's talking about the two intersections, one versus the other, to tell you the truth, if you're coming out on the old section, the bridge is a hazard to your right. If you're coming out on the new section, the curve is the hazard to your left. I'm a retired state trooper sergeant. I've lived at that residence for 24 years. We've been in and out of there a lot, even running emergency traffic coming out of there. I think one is about the same as the other. If you weigh it out, I'm not so for sure if leaving them both open wouldn't be a good idea, because people coming out of the subdivision going to the right on Florence Road would probably use the old section. People going to the left would probably come down and use the new intersection. It's hard to say, but it would actually alleviate some of the traffic off the other. I don't know how much traffic's going to be there, and I don't know. We probably won't even own the property when somebody's trying to get it rezoned to put, some kind of commercial business or whatever, or it may be residential. And residential may work with this. We've got several entrances into the property, but I'd just like for you guys to consider all that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
My name is Kevin Waldron. I live at 3435 Florence Road. This property goes back the issues that are going on to 204, 205, 206. The agreement, we sat down with the city, a number of the city employees, and the agreement was when Florence Road was being developed, the new part of it, to rework it, that we would donate properties that we owned up and down Florence Road, where my dad lives and where I live, and then additionally in Thistle Downs. It was about 3.5 acres that we gave to the city. And I have a letter dated of January the 9th, 2006, and it says the city will quit claim any existing Florence Road right-of-way entitled to Tract 13, not required by road construction or temporary or permanent easements, including any utility easement, once this right-of-way is no longer necessary. The process is to quit claim the right-of-way will need to be initiated by you at a future date of your choosing. And there's several other things in here that went on. But it was an agreement reached by us and the city at the time, and the letter is dated January the 9th, 2006.
Okay.
I'll answer questions if you have any.
Any questions from Mr. Waldron? Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Waldron. Anybody else? Seeing no one come forward, I'll close the public hearing. Mr. Ives, have you seen that agreement?
I'm not sure. I've seen a letter that has a different date that I think is substantially the same, but I don't believe I have been able to find it.
Sam has a copy of it.
Well, does it have that has that date? Okay.
That's correct. The applicant provided this tonight at our request.
Right. And I learned about this issue mid-afternoon, and I have not had time to dig out all of my files. I know that Mr. Huddleston has pulled out a few things from their files, and I don't know that. I'm not sure we could say we've done a complete job of researching this issue.
Mr. Young, do you have a comment?
I think this needs a little more study. I can't figure it out by looking at the maps and the intersections and everything. I would like to maybe postpone this, defer this for a month and let us all look at it again.
I'd like Mr. Ives to be able to research this agreement a little bit more myself, if you don't mind.
I'll be happy to do that.
Any other comments or questions? If not, we're ready for a motion.
Chairman, make a motion to defer.
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for coming down tonight,
We
gentlemen.
will plan to report back at the, this is June, right? The first meeting in July.
Yeah, we will not have another public hearing on it, but, check with the staff and we'll let you know when it's on the agenda again. Okay? Thank you very much. Thank you. The final public hearing tonight is a rezoning application for approximately 21.6 acres located along Joe B. Jackson Parkway to be rezoned from light industrial to heavy industrial. Mr. John Harney, on behalf of Elam Road Partnership, is the applicant. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Chairman Lamb. Subject property, 21.6 acres along the south side of Joe B. Jackson Parkway. It's just to the east of the Joe B. Jackson Parkway interchange with I-24. Mr. Harney has made a request to rezone the subject property from LI, light industrial, to HI, heavy industrial. Mr. Harney has indicated to staff that he has a potential purchaser for the property, the use of which would be auto parts manufacturer. Auto parts manufacturer is only allowed in the HI zoning district, so he has made application to rezone the property so that if the purchase of the property does go through by the prospective purchaser, that that use would be permitted on that property. Under the current LI zoning, it is not permitted. The subject property is directly adjacent to existing HI zoning. The NHK seating facility is directly to the southeast of the subject property. It is also zoned HI. And further to the southeast, the Amazon distribution facility is also zoned HI. Directly across the street is zoned LI. Some of the various businesses along the north side of Joe B. Jackson Parkway include Pretoria, Perfect Equipment, Interstate Warehousing, the Elam Farms Warehouse Development, and further to the north along Elam Farms Parkway, the developing Schwann Cosmetics facility. Just as a point of clarification, the Planning Commission will recollect that there was a public hearing on property directly across Joe B. Jackson Parkway, right where the LI label is on the map. These 4 parcels, as well as 20 acres of the larger parcel to the east, that was to rezone that property to heavy industrial. The Planning Commission, after the public hearing, recommended approval of that request to the City Council. The City Council subsequently scheduled it for a public hearing on June 18th. However, the applicant was able to find a purchaser for the property who is intending to develop more of a warehouse type development consistent with some of the other LI uses along the north side of Joe B. Jackson Parkway, thus not requiring the rezoning to heavy industrial for that particular property. So he has actually withdrawn that rezoning request across the street. Just a point of reference for the Planning Commission. Directly to the west of the subject property is a small commercial highway zone subdivision where there's an existing Subway restaurant and where the Planning Commission back in March approved a multi-tenant commercial building directly to the west of the subject property. And then further to the northwest of the subject property is a gas station which is under construction at the present time. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing. Planning Commission, after the public hearing, will need to formulate a recommendation for the City Council. And I believe before the public hearing, Mr. Matt Taylor, who is representing Mr. Harney and the ownership group, has a brief presentation for the Planning Commission.
Mr. Taylor.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Lamb, members of the Planning Commission. I do have a brief presentation. I am Matt Taylor of SEC here in town, and we're here tonight to go over our request to rezone about 21 acres along Joe B. Jackson from light industrial to heavy industrial. Here you can see we have some concentric circles there of radiuses of a half mile, quarter mile, 3/4 miles, and a mile. Really anything inside of a half mile radius, very little to none, no residential uses, but there are a lot of non-residential uses there, including multiple other car part manufacturers or suppliers and distribution type uses in this immediate area. This area, the Joe B. Jackson interchange, even before the interchange was here, was planned for an employment center on land use plans dating back decades. And then as Joe B. Jackson came about 15 years ago, I believe, it has came to fruition through the zoning as well as the land uses that you see out there. As Mr. Blomley just went over, we have no residential uses in the immediate vicinity. It consists of other industrial properties, either heavy industrial or light. Some of the existing uses are NHK directly to the south, which is a car parts manufacturer itself. You've got Pretoria and Perfect Equipment, which I believe are suppliers or assemblers. And then you have the Amazon facility further to the south. And then, of course, you have the Panattoni development to the north, which is mainly distribution, warehousing. You've also got the Schwann Cosmetics, which is well under construction right now as well. Property itself will lend itself to, we'll make sure we maintain the access points to align with the old Panattoni development, Elam Farms Parkway. That will allow for signalization in the future if it's ever warranted. So we do want to make sure we maintain that. And other than that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have about our request or the property itself.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Taylor? Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Any questions for the staff? Okay, I'll open the public hearing. Ask anybody to come forward that'd like to speak.
And my name is Keith Jones, 127 Tenby Drive. And the first thing I'd like to do is compliment Mr. Harney on the way the earlier development, the Jones-Johnson property turned out. It seemed like everybody won. And I'm so thrilled I may start sending him Christmas cards. So anyway, I have no objection to the use that he plans here tonight. It sounds like another asset for the community. What does upset me is the process that we're doing here. We're basically, he's forced. It isn't his fault. He says he doesn't have enough flexibility under light industrial, and I agree with him. And so you're forcing everybody to rezone to heavy industry. And that is creating a lot of ticking bombs. Now, the use he brings in here may be fine. Amazon is fine. The problem is what happens if these uses go? What you wind up with is all these parcels near homes zoned heavy industry, and they have a lot of really toxic uses associated with them that are there by right. So once you do these properties and once you do all this, you wind up with all these uses that are there, and there's nothing we can do about them. And I've been out on the street talking to people, and the best selling point I have when I talk to them is I point to the chart 1 on the thing, and I show them all the uses that could go in there, like landfill, my God, I should know them by heart by now, oil refinery, meat packing place, and they're there by right, and there's not much you can do about them. And I think we need to think outside the box on this whole thing. I'm worried about Joe B. Jackson. I think this use is fine. I hope that you are careful on Joe B. Jackson. It seems like you're willing to put heavy industry up there. I'm hoping we get a mini Silicon Valley up there, but if you screw it up, we're going to wind up with a mini Pittsburgh, and that's what I'd like to avoid. I think there was a reason that the zoning ordinance contains the light industrial classification, which I'm trying to defend, and I think the authors of the thing thought that really homes should be protected from really nasty industries. And it doesn't make sense that you would just protect some homes, like homes of city councilmen, homes painted green, or homes of 2 stories. It only makes sense if you're going to protect every home. And every time you rezone this, you're undermining the intent of that ordinance. I think you're also, when you talk about heavy industry on Joe B. Jackson, you're undermining what really communities that believe in planning do. I'm familiar with two of them, and they both set aside their heavy industry area well away from homes. And this whole issue of putting heavy industry near homes would never even come up. The developers wouldn't consider it, and the people in charge wouldn't consider it. I'm an outsider, so who am I to tell you that we should be like Fremont, California, or Old Bridge, New Jersey? But a lot of people told me this thing would never, I've talked to a lot of people, and the comment keeps coming up, this would never happen in Franklin. And so I think maybe we ought to emulate Franklin a little more. I think you're also out of step with the feeling in the town. Since that April meeting when this was discussed, I think a whole 3.5 minutes by the Planning Commission, almost like a consent item, I've talked to over 1,000 people. I've been out on good days. I've been out on really rotten rainy days. And I was carrying a petition, and as of now, there are 528 people who have signed my petition, and it says, we oppose rezoning of any rezoning to heavy industrial of any property that is within 2 miles of a neighborhood of 50 homes or more. And I'll be honest, 50% of the people I talk to blow me off. So the 528 is about half. I figure that's why I've talked to 1,000, because I know I've been blown off by probably half the people. But all I have to do to make a sale is I have a little chart that comes from your zoning, your chart 1. I've just boiled it down to heavy industrial. And I just hang the chart out there and I said, look, these are the things that are going by right. Landfill, and I go through all the uses, steel mill, oil refinery, meat packer, and they're sort of appalled. And then if they're not appalled yet, I go to the kicker at the end, which is massage parlor, whatever, all this sex motel and all that. And it almost always gets them. And the most common response is, I wouldn't want that stuff near me, which is basically all I'm saying. I just want to comment on a couple of things that were said at the last Planning Commission meeting that seemed to justify putting heavy industry.
Mr. Jones, I'll have to ask you to wrap it up, please.
All right. I'll get to my point then. I'll put my reasons on the website then, because I think the arguments were really bad last time, but I won't do that. What I think you do is you need to think outside the box, and that means that you need to forget light industry and heavy industry. I'm not interested in joining says planning classifications. I think the real thing is, what's the effect on the houses nearby? And I don't think there's any difference in effect on the houses nearby between, say, the Nissan plant and a warehouse, or the General Mills facility and the stuff that's up there now. The cosmetic thing, none of those bother me. So why don't we help Mr. Harney do his job without forcing all these rezonings by making the light? We need to save light industrial, so let's make it more open, give more flexibility. And you can do this really easily. You can this is just a starter. You could add one sentence to it right after the point where it talks about steel mills and you can't have noise, odors, vibrations, stuff. Just add a simple sentence and say, however, uses that are normally considered heavy industry but don't cause vibrations, noise, pollution, etc., will be allowed in this zone. And if the names bother you, call it Industry 1 and Industry 2. But that would allow you to put this use in there without destroying light industry. It would allow you to put NHK in there. It would solve I think it would solve the problem. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Anybody else? Seeing no one come forward, I'll close the public hearing. Mr. Jones, I think you brought us some good comments, and I hope I'm sure the staff has listened to you, and it seems like your comments is more with the codes, the way the codes are written themselves than this particular applicant coming in here. So thank you for your comments, and I hope the staff will heed those in the future. Are there any questions for the Planning Commission or Mr. Blomley?
Yeah, Chairman Lamb, I just wanted to, just as a point of clarification, many of the uses that may be more objectionable in the HI zoning district are subject to the special use permit process with the Board of Zoning Appeals. So there is an extra layer with a number of uses in the HI zone where many of them are not permitted by right. And I could read a number of those uses out of Chart 1. But while there are a number of uses permitted by right in the HI zone, there's that extra layer of protection with the Board of Zoning Appeals wherein when a specific use is identified that does require a special use permit, another public hearing process would be required. So I think some of that extra protection has already been built into the zoning ordinance.
Okay. Any other questions for the staff?
Let me ask you
Yes,
a
sir.
follow-up on that question, the comments you made. So basically, we do have a heavy industrial 1 and 2 if you have to go through the appeal process. Is that what you're saying?
In a manner of
Not
speaking.
a light industrial 1 and 2 like he suggested, but heavy industrial is already divided. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, in every zoning district, there are uses that are permitted by right and uses that are permitted by special use permit. And the uses that are permitted by special use permit are permitted subject to the Board of Zoning Appeals reviewing, making sure that they meet additional standards that the uses that are permitted by right do not have to meet. And during that process, another public hearing is held. So in a manner of speaking, yes, there are uses that the HI zone would be separated into uses that are permitted by right and uses that are permitted by special use permit.
So let's say an adult-oriented business were to decide to locate inside a heavy industrial area. Would it have to go before that Board of Zoning Appeals?
Those are permitted by right, but there are proximity requirements with regards to adult businesses.
In other words, there are really proximity limitations.
Distance.
It has to be at least 1,000 feet from a variety of things such as residential, churches, libraries. So while it does not require a special use permit, it is not automatically as a matter of right because there are a number of locational restrictions.
Mr. Smotherman, just to give you an example of some of the uses that are permitted only by special use permit in the HI zone, explosive manufacturer, composting facility, fireworks manufacturer, paper mills, petroleum and coal products refining, radioactive materials manufacturer. So a number of those, what some people may find more objectionable uses, do have that extra layer of review by the Board of Zoning Appeals.
And Matthew, just so I understand, who determines which ones have the special review and which ones are by right?
It's in the zoning ordinance adopted by the City Council.
And can that be amended?
Yes, it can.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. We've gotten away from the subject at hand here is Mr. Harney's application that we need to make a decision on. Is there any other questions pertaining to the application before us? If not, we're ready for a motion.
Move for approval. Subject staff comments.
Motion's made and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? The motion carries. That concludes the public hearing portion of our agenda. Staff reports and other business. Mr. Whitaker?
Chairman, as directed by the Planning Commission, we have set up a special meeting. That will be on Tuesday, June the 23rd from 10 till noon. We will provide lunch for you. We will be going over some sign changes proposed, and that will be located out on South Church Street at the Water and Sewer O&M conference room out there. A little different venue for us. But they are going to allow us to use their conference room.
Okay. You might send out an address on that for all of us, if you would.
We will, and that would be a public meeting and be advertised. And also, I'd like to point out on another matter, as we were talking about zoning ordinance. If you recall, the 2035 comprehensive plan that's going on now is taking a overview of our zoning ordinance and will in the future be coming back with us for any recommendations. So we are having the 2035 plan will be looking over the zoning ordinance. I would think in depth and bringing back recommendations for future. So just thought I'd add that in.
Mr. Lewis has handed out, I guess everybody got a copy of our report cards on our Public Chapter 862 obligation. So I urge all of you to take heed to that. I believe we have a possibility for a meeting coming up this coming Monday, I believe. So, any other business that needs to come before this commission?
Chairman Lamb, our special guest did show up. If you want to introduce her.
Please do, Mr. Huddleston.
Taylor Drury is here with us today. She's an intern with the engineering department, and she joins us from MTSU in the MTSU Entrepreneurship Program. If you get a chance to talk to Taylor about her passions and desires regarding entrepreneurship, she's got a very interesting story. We look forward to her work with the engineering department. She's already been with us a couple weeks, and covered a lot of ground, and she'll be with us through the remainder of the summer. So I'd like for you to welcome Taylor to the engineering department.
Welcome, Taylor, and I'm sure I could speak for the Planning Commission. You have our best wishes and our sympathies. So thank you very much. You're working with a great group of people there. So thank you for being here. Any other business, gentlemen, ladies? No other business. We stand adjourned.